want to especially thank the Army Corps of Engineers, New York State, Department of Environmental Conservation in Nassau County for their time and effort here today. I also just wanted to mention joining us here today is Steve Bouchette, Brian Bogle, Scott Sanderson, Jeff Gerber, Preston Oakley, Rob Hampson, Eric Majeski, Angela Sowers from the Army Corps of Engineers, Ryan Hedges from New York State DEC, Brian Snyder from Nassau County. We also have Ralph Kreisman, Warren Tackenberg, Mayor Murray, Mayor Ekstrand, Mayor Hagerson, Mayor Notice, Gil Hans from town of Babylon, and Marion Webb from the town of Oyster Bay, and myself, Robert Kennedy, will be hosting the meeting tonight. I want to say thank you very much for the Army Corps, for Nassau County, and for the Department of Environmental Conservation. I also want to thank Senator Schumer, who initially followed our request for the NCVOA when we all joined together and had a meeting down at Seaview Park several years ago, saying we were really interested in doing something with the Back Bays and somehow preventing the reoccurrence of the Superstorm Sandy. It's great to revitalize after Superstorm Sandy, but as myself and many of the mayors here agree, our intent here is to prevent Superstorm Sandy from flooding. We have in the past all joined and went up to New Bedford, Massachusetts, and saw the surge barrier gates that they installed up there. And these gates were installed about 45, 50 years ago with a jetty on both sides, and since which time they were installed, at that time was $18 million. They've never flooded since. They put these surge barrier gates in to prevent flooding. They've never had an incident since. They've been 100% effective, and the economic development in New Bedford has been tremendous. So I invite everybody to go online one day and just look and see the investment that they did up in New Bedford and look at the economic development as a result of doing this, and they've never flooded since. Nassau County flooded not because the water broke through our barrier islands at Jones Beach and Point Lookout, the Long Beach. The water did penetrate there, but that's not what caused the flooding. The flooding that was caused in Nassau County was a direct result of the water flooding through Jones Inlet and Reynolds Channel, or the inlet at Reynolds, dead zone that they call it, and that's what flooded. So the suggestion of Senator Schumer and all of the trustees and Nassau County who got together said we need to do a Back Bays study and determine the method to prevent another Superstorm Sandy and the damages that occur. Not to mention, think about the cost that it's had. And I'm sure we'll get some exact numbers, but it's in the billions of dollars as a result of Superstorm Sandy. But what's really happened is we've raised about 1% of the homes, which means 99% of the homes that weren't raised are adjacent to these homes that are raised. You have another Superstorm Sandy. Well, what's going to be like to have one raised home with 10 flooded and zombie homes on each side? And these people with the raised homes are going to stay with zombie homes on both sides. In addition, think about the cost right now to A, raise houses, and B, to pay the insurance, which is continually going up. And the values of the homes are decreasing because the insurance rates are so high. I know for a fact that many people walk into the waterfront community, well, are you in the flood zone and what does it cost? Well, okay, thank you, we're going to look someplace else. And what I want everybody to remember is this is going to have a rippling effect if we have another Superstorm Sandy on the South Shore of Long Island. Because when these people move out on the waterfront community, what's going to happen? You're not going to get rid of the police, you're not going to get rid of DPW, you're not going to be able to cut back on the civil service employees. You're going to need these people to protect, A, the homes, the locations, but where are you going to get the tax money from to support it? So everybody on Long Island, Nassau County, the town of Hempstead, Oyster Bay, everybody's going to end up raising taxes because the people who were damaged again the second time in Long Island are not going to come back. Many people walked away once. The next time you're going to see them leave and not come back. So it's my intent to work here with the Army Corps, to work with my fellow friends in the Nassau County elected officials. As president of the New York State Conference of Mayors, I'm working with Fran Murray, who's on the executive board, to try to move this project forward, work with the Army Corps, work with DEC, and work with Nassau County, who's worked so diligently to come up with some answers on what we should do in the future. So with that being said, I'd like to turn it over to our next speaker, who's going to be next from Army Corps, I guess. Okay.
Yeah, good evening, everybody, and thanks for coming. I'll just be really brief. I just wanted to say, thanks for your participation. That's why we're here to work with you guys together. We're in partnership with New York State DEC, but the extended partnership is with the entire community and everyone, who lives in the area. So we have a very broad study team here tonight. We have folks representing planning, engineering, structural solutions, non-structural solutions, and we want to kind of try to get all your questions out on the table. We did release a public document in April, and we can take another look at that, but kind of goes into some of what the problems are and some of what the solutions are as well. So I think our next speaker is DEC, and we just want to kind of kick this off. We'll have a detailed presentation in a little while. Scott Sanderson is our project manager, and he's standing in the back now. So I think just to set the course of the meeting, I just wanted to, kind of open it up and just say the real purpose is to work on this together. Right now we have no recommended plans. We just have some, different alternatives, and we'll tell you what the effectiveness of those are, what the economics are, what the hydraulics are. We have representatives here to answer all those questions. And we'll have a more detailed presentation sort of in the middle of this time frame. So, any questions for me right now? Okay, I think, yes?
Can you repeat your first and last name?
Sure, Peter Blum, BLUM, and I'm the chief of the planning division at the Corps of Engineers. Not the big chief in Washington, just in my office. So, thanks. Next speaker is New York State, I believe. Yes?
Stu Bedford, did you do the gates of New Bedford, or just,
No, well, as the mayor said, those gates have been around for a long time. The New England district built those back in the day when those projects were, pretty common, not so uncommon, and that's one. And very similar to what we have here, because those storm surge barriers consider the navigation needs as well as the flooding. So they're open when they need to be and closed when they need to be. And right now we have to look at all these things, and we'll go over this later. But we'll have a lot of environmental considerations, and a couple of different ways of protecting the Back Bay area. It's much more difficult than what we usually do, which is to put sand on a sandy beach. This is a much different kind of a situation, so we know we have to really work together and share all the technical info with you. So I think the way that the meeting will run is that we're going to do a more formal session later. Scott, is that how it will work? I'll turn it over to you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Scott Sanderson. I'm the project manager. I just wanted to allow a little more time for folks to file in. The way we were envisioning the meeting going from right now, we have a lot of staff around the different posters to answer questions and talk about different things we're proposing. And then I can run through the formal presentation in about a half hour after some folks have some time to talk to folks. That's the way we originally envisioned it. Is that okay with everybody to kind of look around, and there's information on the posters on the different aspects of the study, and then I'll run through the formal presentation and have an official Q&A after that. Okay. So feel free.
how long to the official Q&A?
Well, I'll go through the presentation now. I just, our original plan for the meeting was to have an informal session from 5 to 6 so that folks could walk around and talk to the team members. But if you'd rather me go through the presentation, I can do that now.
We can do it now.
I can do it twice? Yeah. Okay. All right, let's do that. Okay. Sorry for the confusion. I just want to make sure as many people are here as possible. So. All right, well, welcome everybody. Before I get started, just, the purpose tonight's meeting, as Pete referenced, we put out a public document on April 30th. It was a status report, and it basically summarized the work completed to date on the Nassau Back Bays coastal storm risk management feasibility study. Within that document, there's also a proposed path forward and direction ahead for the study. And so tonight's presentation is going to mirror that status report in many ways. Also, I'm going to get into some of the work that has been conducted since the release of that status report and some of our preliminary modeling results I'd like to discuss and share with you as well. And, you know, a couple of things. This meeting, you know, we're here because we want to continue the dialogue. We want to have an open dialogue with folks that are here and affected by this dynamic in this area. And we have the meeting tonight. We have a meeting scheduled for June 27th in Long Beach as well. And in the interest of kind of being inclusive of the whole study area, we're planning on additional meetings later in the summer further to the east. We're going to kind of work our way west. We're in the middle. We're going to work our way west and work our way east to the study area to try to accommodate people so that they can hear what we're doing. So next slide, please, Steve. So a little overview of the agenda of tonight's presentation. I'll give a little study background, summary of our plan formulation process, what we have developed to date, as mentioned, process overview, mention some of the highlights from the status report to help with folks that may or may not have looked at the status report yet, and you know, maybe help with the review of that report and any questions or comments you may want to submit on that report. And regarding comments, as you came in the front door at the desk, there's a comment sheet you can fill out, and it has an email and web address where we'll take any comments you may have, and of course tonight we'll answer questions as we're going through the presentation. So next. So as Mayor Kennedy was discussing Hurricane Sandy, October 2012, originated in the southwestern Caribbean, increased in size, and largest diameter storm reported in the Atlantic Basin. In late October of 2012, it made landfall near Brigantine, New Jersey, and created a tremendous amount of damage, total damage estimate around $65 billion. And as you can see, some of the bullets below that, the highest storm surge and greatest inundation on land occurred in New Jersey and New York, especially around New York City. We have damaging waves in these areas, including Nassau County, with the high water mark of 4.6 feet above ground level observed in Freeport, town of Hempstead. So this is a busy slide, but basically I just want to go over, there's the study authority that allows the Corps of Engineers to work with our non-federal partners and conduct this study. Public Law 71, Chapter 140, that is the overarching study authority for this feasibility study. But it's important to note the nexus with Superstorm Hurricane Sandy. When Public Law 113-2 was passed in response to Hurricane Sandy, that allowed for the Corps of Engineers to conduct a Northern Coast Comprehensive Study. And in that study, there were high-risk focus areas that came out of that study that were recommended for feasibility studies, and Nassau County was one of the 9 that came out of that NACCS North Atlantic Coast Study. So as people mentioned earlier, our non-federal partners, our non-federal sponsors, New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, as well as Nassau County, are partnering with us on this effort. This study was initially had a cost share agreement executed in September of 2016. And one thing I'll get into later in this presentation is the importance of that start date and what that means for follow-through and completion of this study. So, study purpose is to determine the feasibility of providing a coastal storm damage reduction project in the study area. The study area extends about 30 miles east to west orientation. It's a densely populated area with lots of critical infrastructure and lots of damageable assets. Next. So, plan formulation summary. There are a number of damage drivers. Mayor Kennedy touched on some of that information in his introduction, but you have damage mechanisms from the surge to the inlets. You have overwash over the barriers. You also, what's not highlighted on there, going from east to west, you have wind-driven surge from the Great South Bay. That is a significant damage driver in this study area. There are problems that we've identified through these damage drivers, and with every problem comes an opportunity to come up with a solution. And as you can see, we have, as I mentioned, frequent flooding from high tides, spring tides, sunny day flooding, and coastal storms, with a high risk of coastal storm flooding and a threat to life safety. And an important thing to mention here, when the Corps of Engineers, when we conduct a feasibility study, we're required to look at what's called a system of accounts. And that system has 4 different accounts in it. It has a national economic development account, a regional economic development account, an environmental quality account, and what's called another social effects account. And these 4 accounts affect decision-making in the study. Everything from quantifiable damage reductions to ecosystem impacts. We have to factor all of those things into our analysis when we're evaluating and comparing plans and ultimately recommending a plan. Next. So the planning objectives and constraints. This is just kind of a general overview of our process. When we move out on a feasibility study, we observe the existing conditions. We say, what are our problems out there? What are we trying to address? And we develop overarching objectives to guide the study. And in the same breath, we try to identify constraints, things that we'd like to avoid doing in the study. For example, avoiding impacts to federal navigation channels, avoiding impacts to constructed and planned resilience projects. As far as the objectives, 2 major objectives in this study. Reducing the risk of coastal storm damage to communities, public infrastructure, important societal resources, and the environment in southern Nassau County. So you can see from that objective statement that kind of touches on the 4 accounts that I mentioned. And also, an objective is to contribute to the long-term sustainability and resilience of these coastal communities and the Back Bay environment in southern Nassau County. Next slide, please. So a little summary of some of the things we're looking at. We're looking at structural solutions, we're looking at what we call non-structural solutions, and a subset of those structural solutions include natural and nature-based features. So some of the things we're evaluating at this point are storm surge barriers, including cross-bay barriers, so barriers across the inlets as well as barriers across the bay, multiple locations, multiple combinations of those barriers, as well as what we call a perimeter plan, which is a series of levees and or flood walls around a community or facing the bay side, between the bay and the community. And then natural and nature-based features are also part of our formulation. We look at things such as living shorelines or offshore oyster breakwaters, things to attenuate wind-driven waves and things that can help protect and also provide an environmental benefit as well. So I mentioned non-structural measures. Non-structural measures there's a number of different categories of non-structural measures. We look at everything from elevating structures out of the floodplain to potential acquisition and or relocation of a structure that, if an analysis shows that it's a structure that's repeatedly damaged, and the economic analysis shows that it may be worthwhile to consider acquisition of that structure, or if there's open land that can be acquired to provide a buffer. Those are things we can look at, as well as flood warning and evacuation planning and other programmatic considerations. An important thing, this kind of gets into core specific speak, but when we look at, you'll see in our reports, we discuss measures and we discuss alternatives. Measures are kind of the building blocks that we combine and put together to form alternatives. So you'll see plans presented with structural, natural nature-based features, non-structural measures that can all be part of one plan. Next slide, please. And that gets to some of the conceptual alternatives that we're looking at right now. So we have alternatives 1A and 1B. 1A is the oceanfront strategy, which includes storm surge barriers located at each of the inlets in the study area, as well as shorefront measures along the barrier island oceanfront, and complementary non-structural. And when I mention the complementary non-structural and natural nature-based features, when the Corps of Engineers, when we look at a feasibility study, we do an economic analysis. A term that you'll see a lot in our reports is residual risk. So we have certain alternatives that reduce the risk of flooding and damage related to flooding and other ancillary issues. But there's residual risk that remains. And so what we try to do is create a plan that buys down that residual risk. So we have a plan with major features up front, and then we have complementary features that help buy down that residual risk to create a more complete and comprehensive plan. And alternative 1B, something I'm going to get into as we get further along in the presentation, talk a little bit about different combinations or permutations of these plans that we're modeling. But 1B looks at closing the inlets as well as a cross-bay structure that will help mitigate damage related to the east-west bay-driven, fetch-driven damage. As I mentioned earlier, with the flood walls and levees, the perimeter strategy would be a series of, for lack of a better word, barriers along the bay side, facing the bay front along the landward side. But there's challenges that come that we are recognizing with the modeling with this perimeter strategy. And then not only do you have ocean and bay-driven flooding, but when we start proposing putting up these flood walls and levees, we have to consider the fluvial landward side flooding, and we don't want to create a bowl effect behind the perimeter plan. So, things like pump stations and tide gates and some of the smaller inlets will have to be considered as complementary measures as part of a plan like this. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the non-structural focus strategy, which to date, we've looked, done a preliminary look at elevating structures out of the floodplain. Next slide, please. So, to take a couple steps back, the next couple of slides will go through some of the work that was done in the status report that was released on 30 April. So the next 3 slides, I'll kind of run through that, and then after that, talk about some of the work that's been going on after that. But as I mentioned earlier, there was hydrodynamic modeling done, and what the hydrodynamic modeling is showing are the three primary mechanisms of damage drivers in this study area. And you have storm surge through the tidal inlets, which we've been discussing, as well as local wind-driven storm surge along the bay axis, and then overwash across the barrier islands. And you know what, I'm going to go into it now rather than wait for the slide, and then I'll go back into it. I think it's important to note some of the preliminary findings we've seen with storm surge barrier modeling, with cross bay barrier modeling. To date, we have with project model results where we have the three inlets closed off as a standalone alternative measure, and we have modeling results for that. We also have modeling results where we have East Rockaway and Jones closed, as well as a cross bay barrier from the Jones Beach area. What we're seeing is that and these are draft results that require further analysis, but what we're seeing is that if we just close the inlets alone, the three inlets, we're only seeing right now about a 1 foot reduction in water surface elevations with just the inlets. But if we combine that with the cross bay barrier, we see a significant reduction in water surface elevations and a significant damage reduction. However, what we're doing now, and what we have to look at, is the cross bay barrier, because of the strong east to west driving forces. It provides protection to the west, but then there's potential to induce elevated waters to the east. So what we're doing is we're looking at different locations, cross bay barriers. We're looking at different combinations of cross bay barriers with the different inlets closed. So there's a lot of sensitivity analysis being done. Yes?
Just a question with regards to that. What was the percentage of storms that we've had in the past with the winds from the north-northeast? Because notice that Long Island's not just east to west, it's really north-northeast to southwest. What was the percentage of storms that we've had that actually drew the winds from the northeast that brought the eastern bays into the western bays? And the second point of that is the maximum tide you can get is 4 miles an hour, which means in 4 hours you couldn't go from Fire Island to Jones Inlet because it's a 17, 18 mile run, maybe 20 miles. Which means even if the tide were to come at 4.5 miles an hour, which is the maximum speed of that tide, it shouldn't affect the west bays.
So, Rob, could you answer that question?
Yeah. It's a good point that historically there have been a lot of storms that have taken past east of Nassau County with the wind direction. Has not necessarily pushed water into Nassau County. But what the model is showing is that maybe there's a greater risk of storms actually passing to the west of Nassau County or south. Like Hurricane Sandy, we do get major surge. I don't have exact numbers on historically how many storms have passed.
I mean, I would think that should be a concern because obviously it's only a 1% factor. Let's not base a cross bay gate where you're going to maybe present a problem to the east of that. And if in fact it only happens on a minimum percentage, and B, the tide can only move at 4 miles an hour, which is maximum tide speed in that area, by the time you have high tide, the tide will go back out again.
Okay, so then the water has to travel from one end all the way up there. It's just like you're pushing the whole bay at once. So, you know, you're pushing the whole surface of water from one end to the other, and the whole water kind of moves as one. So, the water's not going to travel all the way from, say, Wilderness Reach to Nassau County to cause that increase in water.
What they have done in the past is they would close the gates earlier so that you would have more makeup for any increased tributaries or water coming into them. So if they knew it was going to be a larger storm, we close the gates earlier at a lower tide, we could make up that expansion in the event of a problem. I think those should be taken into consideration for this.
We are looking at that. I will just add that right now the gates are closed at mean sea level, so kind of like mid-tide. So there's maybe a slight potential to reduce those water levels, but it's unlikely that synthetic storms that have been modeled. And those 20 synthetic storms are supposed to represent the range of potential storm tracks that the study area can see. And then what we do is we run the hydrodynamic model for each of those storm events and evaluate how the storm surge moves in and out of the study area through the inlets across the bay. And what Scott was saying is that one of the big problems is that storms that, like Hurricane Sandy, have the potential to blow water from Great South Bay into Nassau County. So even if you close the inlets on those type of storm events, there's still pretty high probabilities in Nassau County.
So where does storm drains go?
That's Scott was mentioning that we're also looking at bay closures to cut off that cross bay flow.
Well, one of my question was, have you considered why the difference occurred with Sandy when storms like Agnes and Florida and Donna were significantly higher rate, more impactful, Florida main impact in Nassau County? Why was it like greater during Sandy but not during those storms?
I can answer that. My name is Gil Hance, and I'm from the east. And just to answer your question a little bit, there are two types of storms that we have to look at here on Long Island. One is the hurricane, and the other there is the nor'easter. And over the past 40 years, the nor'easters have been the ones that have hurt us. And a lot of that is because of the actual degree of the winds hitting us. Hurricane Gloria happened to hit us at a low tide with a more southeast wind, which drove the fetch up against the beach and didn't drive it into the beach. One of the problems we have to the west end is that we already have two gates between South Oyster Bay and the Freeport Harbor, and those two gates are the Montauk Parkway and the Meadowbrook Park. And I'd like to thank our dear friend Robert Moses, the great planner of Long Island, who created all this mess. He happened to build these barriers there, and we're stuck with them. There's nothing we can do about it. We on the west end, we have a shore parallel inlet. It's one of the only shore parallel inlets on the East Coast. And what that means is it runs the same way. You here have a shore normal that runs from the ocean directly north-south. And you also have a barrier, and if I'm not mistaken, then that's the Loop Parkway Bridge. That's the only way to access your inlet. So what we are dealing with is that northeast fetch of wind that blows water all the way down from the eastern end of actually central Long Island all the way down to the west. We're stuck with more than modeling. I don't know how you can ever model the South Oyster Bay, the Great South Bay, and the Freeport area because of all the obstructions that we do have. But I firmly believe that the northeast storms are the ones that give us a problem. Hurricanes generally come from the south. And the way Long Island is situated, the south wind will come directly onto the face of our barrier islands. What water will you have pushed from south to north is only the water that's in the bay, and it would come directly up, not with a northeast storm that pushes the water down the bay. How we're ever going to change that, I don't know, but that's kind of the dynamics of the Great South County Back Bay area, in my opinion. I haven't done any models. I'm with the town back. And I've been studying the barrier islands and Back Bays for about 15 years, so I'm an old fool.
So, other analysis that's ongoing, or actually that was conducted for the status report. This is another summary page from the status report. Was the economic analysis. So the total study area focuses in Nassau County, but extends into Suffolk and portions of Queens. And the study area is something I would like to just state up front. The study area is very inclusive right now. In the Corps of Engineers, we have what's called a study area and a project area. It's nuanced, but the difference is a project area is where we build something, study area is where we study the effects of what we're analyzing. So we like to start with a study area that's more inclusive. And generally speaking, the project area is a smaller footprint than the actual study area itself. So at this time, our study area is rather large, but it may get smaller as the analysis continues, as we start to see the effects in different directions of things that we're proposing. So, next slide, please. So the environmental analysis, at this point, we've been looking at the existing without project conditions for the environmental analysis. But something very important to keep in mind, two major things I want to emphasize on with the environmental analysis is, one, the Coastal Barrier Resources Act is a very important act that we have to consider during the formulation of our alternatives. It's hard to see on this figure, but under the Coastal Barrier Resources Act, which is managed and enforced by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, you have different units that have certain requirements and restrictions associated with them. And what I mean by that is, if you have something called a system unit under the Coastal Barrier Resources Act, the Corps of Engineers as a federal agency is not allowed to expend federal dollars in a system unit under the Coastal Barrier Resources Act. And that's going to be a big issue for us to tackle during this study, because the system units are pretty pervasive in this study area. And we're going to have to work closely with our partnering agency to see, if we recommend a plan that involves constructing something in a system unit, it's going to require a lot of coordination with them and negotiation, because we're going to have to figure out how it's going to be paid for, what entity can pay for it, whether there can be an exemption. Sometimes with the Coastal Barrier Resources Act, you get exemptions. And also, something else to consider is the Fish and Wildlife Service has submitted draft map revisions. And so the current system units that are in the study area now are actually going to get smaller. So it'll give us a little bit, if they're approved, it'll give us a little more leeway to formulate plans. So we talked about this a little bit already, but some of the work that's ongoing, we're looking at different locations, we're modeling different locations for cross-bay barriers. And this is just a modeling effort right now. We're not at all at a point where we're designing. We have rough order of magnitude costs that will compare to the economic impacts that we see from some of these modeling efforts. But you can see currently to date, as I mentioned, we had the cross-bay barrier at Jones Beach, Causeway modeled already, but we're also currently modeling a location to the west as well as a location to the east to try to bracket the study area and get an idea of the impacts of these crossway barriers. Yes?
Is the one parkway and the middle parkway cross-bay barriers?
So we're treating
bridges as barriers.
They're barriers, but the way we would design them would be similar to a storm surge barrier, where it would have gates that would open and close to allow for navigation. So they are barriers to a degree right now, but it wouldn't be the same as if we created a new barrier.
So are they going to be barriers just when storms are coming?
They would be intended for storm conditions.
So they're open the rest of
Right. But an important thing to consider with these barriers is there's environmental impacts that we're gonna have to consider, both direct and indirect, related to construction of these types of barriers. And there's gonna be impacts on the hydraulics in the bay. Just the structure itself is gonna inhibit flow that already exists, even when it's open. So these are things that we're gonna have to, down the road, if these become strong, viable plans, we're gonna have to model and evaluate. So,
And Scott,
yes.
in another one of your presentations that I saw, you showed pictures of the crossway barriers. And even though they are open, there's still significant infrastructure that closes off a lot of the crossway moving underwater.
That's correct. And that's something with the environmental modeling, the hydrodynamic modeling, we'll have to look at what impacts that has on water quality, on salinity, on flushing. There's going to be a lot of direct and indirect impacts that we have to evaluate. Yes.
What's the range of spans of these crossway barriers? How long do they remain inside? A mile, several miles? And how high do
Do we know that?
They generally follow the existing causeways, which a lot of it is already landfill, that's pretty high. So it would probably need to be higher, we don't know all the details worked out yet. And then the gates, we have movable, that end of gates, where the existing chains cut through those barriers. I don't have the numbers for how wide.
Yeah,
The gates would have order, a couple hundred feet.
Basically, a couple hundred feet.
Yeah.
But these can be miles long.
Well, you would have some pieces that are like the big expensive gate piece that then would tie into either like a levee or the existing roadway that then would stretch for miles.
Closed. Potentially closed.
Yes.
Yeah, but those wouldn't be new structures, they would basically be closing off the open channels, say, beneath the Bedford Parkway, there are only a few bridges in those locations. Those would be the sections that you would be putting in these findings, because the rest of the span is basically land.
Yeah. You might just be raising the road up, right, and then a few expensive gates and existing chains.
Okay, so something I mentioned earlier, which is a really very critical item to talk about. As you can see on the top line, the cost sharing agreement initially to kick off this study was signed in September of 2016. So by law, according to the Water Resources Development Act of 2014, the Corps of Engineers has 3 years to execute a feasibility study. So we're coming up on September 2019. Now, that's the typical study. This is not a typical study. This is a complex study that requires more time and additional funding to execute. And we've made that recommendation to our higher authority, to our headquarters, that we need, the schedule laid out here is what we really need to execute this study. So we're currently waiting so the way the process went, we submitted it to our headquarters, they're reviewing it, and they're going to submit a waiver request on behalf of this study to extend it out to the schedule listed there for additional funding as well. And it has to be approved by the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works. And another thing to mention, there's 2 potential avenues. This study could be something that gets approved in a supplemental bill where it could be 100% federally funded, or it could be a study that continues on 50-50 cost share with our non-federal partner that we receive more time and money on. We don't know at this point what the direction is in that regard. We're waiting at the district level to find out.
When has the money effectively run out, or this is going to stop until you guys approve it for additional funding?
So time will end before the month. We have we have sufficient funding to conduct the study, but the real factor is the time, because September 2019, we have to stop the study unless we receive a waiver.
You think you need more time?
Absolutely. Yes?
Why is it that you guys need more time? You've had 3 years since the study, and you're asking for more time. What's the holdup? What are the missing elements that that are missing in order for us to get full studies so that we can decide what's going to happen with the storage barrier or anything else?
So with this, it's a very complex environment, and these are solutions that it's not a typical 3-year study, and it's something that at the district level, both our partners in New York and Philadelphia, we've been asking for this additional time, and it's just very complex. It just can't be done with the amount of modeling that has to be done. For example, with the surge barriers themselves, we're going to be modeling multiple combinations of inlet closures and cross bay barriers, and that it just takes a lot of time. And not only do we have the hydrodynamic portion of that, but all that has to feed our economics. Economics has to be modeled that each time. And then we have the environmental impact. There's significant environmental impact potentially associated with some of the solutions we're proposing. And so to really understand the potential environmental mitigation costs that could come with some of these projects, it's going to take time and money.
I just wanted to add, if you go back to the slide before, what we're doing right now is very, very critical. And between now and next year, we'll see this milestone called tentatively selected plan milestone, May 2020. So on May 2020, we want to have that plan figured out. And that means that we reach a consensus with everyone here. We figure out which one is economically viable, which one will work with the environment, and which plan the locals desire, as well as what the federal objectives are. So next 12 months are very, very critical.
And most important, that milestone is what comes after that. So the TSP milestone he just described is a Corps of Engineers milestone. After that, we release our draft feasibility report and environmental impact statement. So that's going to describe, that's going to be open to the public. It's going to go to the resource agencies as a draft report with a draft and the select plan. We'll get to see it, comment on it, and then we'll move on to the final report to go over all of that.
The past few years, there's been quite a few studies that have been done with Sea Grant and with U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and also with Stony University. Where's all that information? It's been years of studies done on Back Bays. Are you attributing some of this information from that? Because why are we chasing the tail? There's a lot of stuff that's out there. Why is this, or is this information, I shouldn't put the cars before the car, but where is this information for that?
So when we conduct the study, we gather as much existing information as we can find to develop our existing conditions and our without project conditions. So whatever information we were able to find, we have gathered. I can't comment on the specifics right now, but I can get back to you on that.
Yeah, that's something I'd like to know, let the village know where this stuff is, because that was years in the meeting, and a lot of information with USGS, with Sea Grant, with Army Corps, and everything else. That was years, and millions of dollars went into that. So when we looked and said that we were going to go until 2022 now for more information, sooner or later, you just got to say, what's the deal?
Yes.
My question is related. There are existing studies that the Army Corps is doing currently. The New York Harbor and Tributary study, and also the firearm
Yes, I mean, where our New York district is leading the effort on those studies, and actually, we work together. You know, our district provides quality control analysis of those studies, so we work together. We're one core in that regard. It's a regional effort on these studies, and yes, there's close coordination. We have to, and one of the things we have to be very careful about is when we look at proposing plans. We have to look at the without project conditions or the with project conditions of a neighboring study or project, so that our proposed plan is not negatively affecting the impacts of their proposed plan. So there's definitely close coordination in that regard.
So if they're modeling something major, your model has to look at potential closures, for instance, Sandy Hook,
Right.
to Rockaway, to understand what the impacts will be on your project.
Right, and a lot of it depends on the timing too, as the timing of the implementation of the different projects. So what they're modeling and the proposed implementation time of that, when we do an analysis of an impact of our project, we look at a 50-year project life cycle, and we say, okay, these are our assumptions of what's going to be, if we did nothing, if nothing came of this study as a hypothetical, what would 50 years look like with all these other projects and studies going on? And then we take that and say, okay, here's our recommended plan, and we compare it to that same 50 years, and we say, okay, maybe there's benefits in our study area from those other plans that we can't quantify and count as a benefit of our study, so we have to factor that in when we're justifying our proposed plan. Yes?
Kind of piggyback a little bit of what he was talking about, we kind of going into a more hypothetical but realistic, I guess, I'm just going to say it, like, you've had 3 years to study, you're requesting more time, but what's a realistic timeline on how long it's going to take to implement and then also construct possibly these surge barriers? Is that going to be a possibility once it's on site?
So the implementation part, that's a hard question for me to answer, because what we can control right now is our schedule to complete the study. Implementation is a very complex issue, because when we complete a study, we complete what's called a Chief of Engineers report that gets signed and then goes up to the Assistant Secretary of the Army and then ultimately to Congress. And Congress then authorizes a project in a Water Resources Development Act bill. So the time from study completion to implementation is very dependent on how quickly something gets authorized by Congress and then appropriated. Because you have the authorization that lists it and then the appropriation that brings the funding behind it to build it. And those are hard things to predict. But that is the process, though. Yes?
Are we considering dredging at all in this analysis, or have you considered dredging at all?
To date, we have not looked at dredging as one of the measures or alternatives, but it is something we can consider going forward.
The Army Corps does a tremendous amount of dredging throughout the country, so why would you not consider it here?
Like what context? I mean, like dredging to reduce.
Well, dredging obviously to make the water more navigable, but also increasing the size of the catch basins. Instead of buildings going up, make the surface of the canals deeper. I mean, in a major storm, every little bit helps, right? So, if back in the 80s, there was a lot more dredging going on. I believe for environmental reasons, they cut back. Probably also for financial reasons, they started cutting back on dredging. Nassau County in particular, and ever since then, obviously, there's a much more street flooding going on, and that could just be because of the climate change and whatnot, but it's just common sense. If you increase the depth of the canals, you'll be keeping as much water in the canals as possible.
Yeah, that's got a good response. Basically, the ocean just fills it up pretty quickly. And actually, if you dredge it deeper, before the storm comes, they're ready to fill up. So it really, dredging the canals and inlets doesn't really change the water levels in the back bay.
See, the issue that at this point to realize is that the bay is actually evolved as a freshwater environment initially. There were the last ice age when the ocean was 40 miles out there. And it didn't become brackish environments until about 8,000 years ago. And the reason why we had much less flooding previously was because the salinity rates out there was only about 15 parts per thousand, while the ocean is 31. That means that ocean water is denser than freshwater. So it made it much more difficult for ocean water to force at the inlets, because believe it or not, the volume of the freshwater flowing out of the bay was significantly higher. A good study, for example, you have looked at 1970, Peter K. Wilde, who was a very well-respected oceanographer in Stony, did that study in the Great South Bay and found that the tidal range in the bay was only about 8 inches. So I don't know where anybody here was, but where I live is about 2.5 feet now. Because the reason why is the less freshwater input you have, the greater risk of flooding you have. And that's why we have more street flooding, because now the freshwater, since there's not as much of a flow of freshwater flowing out, the bay doesn't flush from tidal action from the ocean. It flushes from freshwater from our side. So every time we build a new mall and we build a new kind of development, we increase how much water we apply to that, but we also reduce the recharge into the aquifer, and that all reduces freshwater inputs. So if you make the bay deeper, and by the way, just a quick thing, it's not a bay, it's a lagoon, which is a shallow body of water, which is protected from the ocean by reefs and barrier beaches. That's one of the reasons why we have less chance of flooding the more shallow it is, because tidal effects are lessened the more shallow the body of water is. The deeper it is, the more the water will flow in. One of the things that I'd love to see you guys actually include in one of your studies would be something that would actually maybe take the approach of reducing salinity levels in the bay by increasing base flow of freshwater inputs, and more likely getting to having a much lower tidal range and considerably less flooding. Have you considered that at all?
Not to date. Thank you for the point. Yes.
Yes, so we live in the very end of our island, and we would piggyback onto this Nassau County Back Bays study, because the last study only went up to Beach 9th Street in Bar Rock, where the boardwalk ends. So for the last year now, since that study was completed, they have been dredging on a daily basis, Beach 9th Street, where the ocean meets Reynolds Channel, goes to Atlantic Beach through Barrier into East Rockaway Inlet. We've been getting worse flooding ever since. Now they've been dredging, the vehicles are there now, and they're replenishing the beaches along the Rockaways and putting in jetties and doing all that. And our situation, in my opinion, we live there, has been worse. Our flooding just on a regular rain comes up the streets, comes up our beach, comes up, we're right in the middle. We have a channel of water to the south of us, then Atlantic Beach and the ocean. And behind us, we have creeks and bays. So on a daily basis, and not a storm situation, they have it flooding all the time, coming into people's houses, into their cars, coming up. So I don't know the dredging is the answer, because it just stopped at Beach 9th Street. That's why we were put in touch with this. They piggybacked us into it. So it's not helping us, it may be helping the boardwalk in some areas, in some homes, but I've seen that part of the boardwalk is already crumbling. It's just been fixed and sandy, and this is supposed to replenish, and it's just dredging and making more water come to where we live. So I don't know if that answers your question. Dredging is the answer or not the answer. But we're stuck right there now, and we're the last area of the red line now, like where if you think it's a small study, we're not in any study anymore.
I appreciate that, and I would really ask, could you fill out a comment form?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so we can have that information.
Yeah, I will. Thank you.
Yes.
Aren't navigable waterways something that you would be considering in terms of environmental concerns? And if that's the case, I mean, dredging should clearly be a part of that. I think the Army Corps kind of missed a great opportunity when they did the groins on the Barrier Island, and they didn't dredge any parts of the inlet. They took their sand from elsewhere. I mean, it creates a navigable barrier where the depth is so low in certain areas, it's almost a hazard. septic requirement, and please consider that.
I think, can I just address that? I think what you're talking about is navigation channel dredging to a certain depth to maintain boat traffic.
Correct.
And I think what you're describing is dredging that's going on in support of a beach fill project where they're placing material on the beach. Okay, so they sound like they're the same thing, but what she's describing is we go to a certain area, identify a volume of sand that's going to be in a large lump or a large relic barrier island historically. You take that sand and put it on the beach to reduce flooding. She's saying that she might be having some secondary impacts from that dredging that wasn't calculated, wasn't anticipated. Navigation you're talking about, I think, is about, and you're talking about, we're going to maintain this channel to a certain depth so boats can get in and out. They're both dredging, but they both have different purposes. That's to maintain boat traffic. That's for hurricane storm damage reduction. This project right now is for hurricane storm damage reduction, along the Back Bay, and is not primarily purpose for the navigation projects. One of Scott's constraints when he started the presentation talked about not having, one of the constraints was not having an impact on federal navigation channels. So there are some federal navigation channels that we maintain in this area, but the stated purpose of this project is hurricane storm damage. I think you guys talk about it. I just wanted to point that out. But I think we can talk here.
I did have a conversation with operations, your operations division about 6 months ago, and I believe they're putting together specs and looking for money to dredge Jones Inlet. So I think they are looking to do that going forward.
And there was a project, the town of Hempstead did with the Army Corps, and they took 680,000 cubic yards out of the west shore of Jones Inlet against Point Lookout, put it on the beach, and we rebuilt our dunes. So a dredging project can be both things, clearing the federal channel, Jones Inlet, and also storm reduction. It was a $10 million project, 2015.
So the scope of your study, but do you know if the Montauk Fire Island study is considering closing the new breach in Belport at Fire Island and also Richards Inlet, or putting up the barriers there?
I mean, my understanding is that it's the National Park Service's land. We're not nowhere here from your district that can speak to that. I think it's up to the National Parks and Laws.
I can kind of answer that one too, if you'd like. No, on bridges, there's no plans to do that. And right now, the Army Corps did dredge bridges this year and replace the sand on the downdrift side where it belongs. And being as though they've done that, the new inlet is using that sand. And if we stay and have a good summer season, that inlet will close itself up within, I can't project what it looks like, within 6 months if we have a good summer season, that inlet will close.
In your study, have you considered the inland high water mark that has changed after Superstorm Sandy, and considered raising all the structures above the high water mark? I mean, I live on the south, I live on the Grand Waterway Peninsula. I survived Sandy because I'm a new construction, 1987. I survived Sandy by an inch. But now the reality is, every block that we go down, we have that 10% of homes or 15% of homes that are raised. Why not do that? I mean, I'm asking you, have you considered just taking that high water mark and the government has funded the raising of these homes. Just consider raising all the homes and even high water mark, so you eliminate any cost of the expenses.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, so the answer to your question, yes, so the non-structural category of measures, that's where we look at elevation of structures out of the floodplain as a selected plan potentially. So we are looking at that. We're in a very preliminary phase of that analysis, but that is a significant part of our analysis going forward. Yes. All right, thank you all. I'll open it up to more question and answer. That's all the slides I have for now. Yes.
Has the technology for certain barriers changed since the New Bedford model, 50 years old, 60 years old? Is there something better, newer, that's more updated or modern in terms of search barrier?
I mean, I think there's been some advances in new technology in there, it's in the bottom, so but a lot of parts are still using the same general, sector gates, the same type of technology. It's reliable, it's working fast, it's a comfort level with those kind of designs. So we'd be considering similar designs as well as potential.
Is there steel gates that will
Yeah, they're steel.
the
The New Bedford ones? New Bedford?
ones that you use here?
We don't know. I mean, at this stage of the study, we're really at a much more conceptual level. Looking at a couple different gate types. But, as we progress down the study, the gate type can change. Depending on, as you put more and more data, say like new type of some sort of data, or that could change perhaps what is the most cost effective, if that is the plan.
And who would operate and maintain these gates after the core is done?
So a typical core project operational maintenance is turned over to the non-federal sponsor. But that's a typical project, and something like this may not be typical, and it depends. I mean, the way a project is implemented, everything from the cost sharing to the operation and maintenance, Congress can influence how that is executed. But typical is the non-federal sponsor.
Scott, I have a question for Steve. I think the New Bedford is designed as federal land, New Bedford project.
Keep trying to answer the question for you.
And the only for New Bedford is federal.
I think it is. I think it's maybe some navigation part of this.
So for typical projects, it's handed over to the non-federal sponsor, but there are occasions when it's
The Bedford has far fewer requirements, just one arm, as opposed to an entire estuary.
I know you're in the process of requesting the waiver
Yes.
of the 3-year requirement. That's not necessarily included in the timeline. Is there an idea of when knowledge of the production is going forward will be known by the stakeholders?
Yeah, so we don't know if and when we're going to get the waiver. The request is in and it's under review. We're kind of in a wait and see mode.
How do we help expedite this final report to come in? I mean, as we said, it's the 3 years, we planned on 3 years. Now it's up to 6 years. It started at 3 million. I don't know what the potential number is now. But what is actually taking so long here? We've extended an additional 3 years, and how can we help expedite it to bring this in sooner? If we're talking 2022, and then by the time it goes to Congress, it's 2025. Then by the time you get approved, we're talking about 20 years from now. Project that comes to fruition. How do you help expedite it? I mean, if you have another superstorm Sandy between now and then, take it all off the table. It's not going to be working.
No, I hear your point. As far as expediting it, I mean, as I was mentioning earlier, there's just a lot of analysis that has to be done. We have to go through a level of analysis where we identify a national economic development plan. We're required by our policy to do so. And with the surge barriers and the cross-bay barriers alone, the level barriers. Just the hydrodynamic portion of that takes time and money, and then the economic portion that feeds off of that takes additional time as well. I can say that in May of 2020, we're on, if we get the waiver, we're on track to at least recommend our initial plan and put it out for public review in the draft feasibility report in 30 days following that. So within a year, we intend to have a plan recommended, and then there's a whole feasibility level design analysis that occurs after that. But I'm not really answering your question because I don't know how to expedite it without, we have to do the analysis that's required.
But it would be important to start some dialogue now about some of the things that have to happen. For example, as the authorized by Congress, that conversation is actually taking place right now. For example, we have this environmental hurdle, this COBRA thing to get through. So we need to start coordinating that now as well. They're all meant for such structures as traditionally been non-federal, and that's a conversation that we need to have. And so the more we, kind of do what we're doing right now, the easier this is going to go in the future. A lot of what we still need to do is economics as well. We need to see what's in the federal interest. So we're taking a very deliberate approach to kind of go through and make sure we capture all the benefits that are available. Because if you've got something that's a 0.9, and if the cost ratio, and we're working really hard to see what we can do as far as the federal government goes, that's a challenge. But I think we're taking some really good data and making sure that this thing is, get all the benefits that we know are available. So it's a long process, but there's things we can do to expedite that. We can meet separately there, or however we want to talk about the strategy, how to coordinate this, how to formulate a plan. There are things that we can do. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes.
In the course of your survey, there's a specific area I wanted to maybe call it the Strawberry area. It's a problem because it's not a good area, as you mentioned, it's similar to a teacup in that area, but the waterways that are existing now are actually toxic because much of the sewage pollution when it's that area. Have you come across anything during your studies to be sure to bring out that area of the toxins, and have you found a place to deposit those toxins again as an emergency?
Not at this time, but I can speak to that a little bit, because one of the things that we have to do when we're looking at existing conditions from an environmental standpoint and across the study itself, we have to look at existing environmental conditions, and if we find that there's contaminant levels in an area where we're proposing a project, the Corps of Engineers cannot implement and propose a project in a contaminated area. It has to be remediated before the implementation of the project. So, are you talking about at the inlet, the waterway at the?
Higby Creek out to the main canal area. So the people that are now building their homes and raising them are being exposed to those toxins on a daily basis, and with particular attention to when it actually floods and then comes out of the creek onto the actual street level, into people's backyards. That is a problem that needs to be addressed, I would think, immediately and not 10 years from now. We're looking at possibility of people coming forward with cancer in the future. So what are you going to do about that? And how do you make that a priority before waiting the next, few years until you can figure out what you're going to do? When you think of the environmental issue, that should be something that should be handled immediately.
First of all, I'm really sorry to hear that situation, and I don't have an answer right now, but I would please ask you to submit a formal, so that we can have a formal comment in the record on that. So that
because that's part of the problem I'm trying to bring to your attention. There are people that, for example, need to build bulkheads. They need to
toxins. And I don't feel that the people that live in this community deserve to be treated that way, when many of them gave up their 401ks, many of them went out, got homes, built their homes, raised their homes, and now being exposed to possibility of, like I said, diagnosis of cancer. So I'm bringing this to your attention in this forum because it's an immediate issue that needs to be taken care of. And I don't know who's supposed to take care of it, what remediation we need to handle in doing that, but it's a problem that needs to be addressed immediately. And I will talk to you all.
Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Just want to reiterate how important it is to do community meetings in the other South Shore communities. I know you have Freeport scheduled in Long Beach, and even the communities that go outside the project, well, outside the project area, but within the same scope along the South Shore that could be impacted by crossway barriers or storm surge protectors on the inlets.
Absolutely, I appreciate that. And one of the things where we're working with some stakeholders, trying to identify the best locations, the most inclusive locations. We do, as you mentioned, we do have a meeting on the 27th, but we're already in discussions about working our way, and this can change depending on feedback, but working our way further east in the study area in the latter part of sometime in July, August, and possibly having an additional meeting or two, depending on demand and attendance that we can get at these meetings and feedback we get from public and stakeholders. So we are tracking that, but I appreciate that.
And one other comment on that is this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the link on the literature that you all got. So it'd be great if you feel free to share that with any of your neighbors or colleagues that help out so we can see what happens.
Yes.
Are there areas that are considered priorities that will get, say, for certain areas will work first because of either financial priorities on Wall Street or priorities that you could look at solving them?
So no, this study is based on the dynamics of the hydrodynamics. I mean, we identify the problem areas and we look at areas that receive damage, and we make decisions on how to best mitigate that damage at a reasonable cost. So we don't necessarily prioritize one area over another. We look at what the damage drivers are and how to most efficiently reduce that damage.
So you're saying all the areas within the box have an equal vulnerability?
They don't have an equal vulnerability. They all have, all those areas in the box are within the 500-year floodplain. So that's how we delineated the northern extent. So what we do, that's kind of an initial phase to try to get as inclusive a study area as possible. And then we look at where are the real damage drivers, where is the surge really hitting hardest, and what can we do to reduce that damage as much as possible. So it kind of, it's not equal across the study area. It kind of varies depending on where the water and where the damage is coming from.
Density of the population. Density of development, will flood levels in certain areas, but if you have a higher density populated area, you probably have a higher risk level because there's more property that's damaged. That just gets to what the damages are. That doesn't mean you necessarily would take that and prioritize it. You would just say that this area has high damages, this area has low. But why not? I mean, why not prioritize the areas that have more people and more service, etc.? I'm kind of out of phase approach to it.
Well, as Brian was saying, we look at, so maybe Preston, would you mind talking a little bit about our economic methodology?
Sure. I don't want to go too far into the weeds, but I want to make clear the distinction between the study itself and the implementation of the project. So for the study, we look at everywhere. Now, if you look at a perimeter plan, for instance, some areas will have to be aggregated together since you can't separate out like the high risk and the low risk behind those large alternatives. And then again, for the study, we look and just see which ones have positive benefit cost ratio, whether that's 1.1 or 3.0 or whatever the number comes back. Then we can take implementation. Again, that's after authorization and appropriation. You can build perimeter sections for one town earlier than another. That's a whole different process. But for the study, every section within the study area is evaluated on its own merit. So risk levels, vulnerabilities, damage drivers, all that. Yes.
For the nature-based features, we were also considering looking at the wetlands that already exist within the South Shore area. We do have the highest concentration of salt marshes in this project area, but some of those salt marshes are really degrading and they're not very healthy salt marshes.
Yeah, so we're early on in the process, but we will be looking at wetland, not only wetland protection, but wetland enhancement as potential nature-based features, natural features.
Would something like that help, what they call sunny day flooding, or the nuisance flooding that we deal with, like augmenting the salt lines? Because the storm gates obviously won't do anything for a bad high tide.
Yeah, I mean, sunny day flooding, I think there's a number of factors that could be potentially influencing that, but that's definitely something that could help with it. But that's something we'll have to look at a little further to see what the drivers are behind the sunny day flooding.
Is there a potential, given that you're turning over some of these controls of these after they're built, that different municipalities could use them for cross purposes, so they're not doing anything?
Use them for cross
In
purposes.
other words, that for their own priorities, those are open at certain times that are meetings and just
Well, so when a federal project is recommended and implemented, there's a certain plan, operation and maintenance plan associated with that. And so it has to, the operation and maintenance has to follow that plan and project purpose. So it can't be augmented it can't be used in different ways. It has to follow the operation and maintenance plan. So I would say the answer is no to that.
Yes. So I have a question with service drivers. At this stage, do you have any idea what percentage of the inlets will be closed when the gates are not employed, when they're open?
So it's about a 50% reduction here.
So how often do gates be operating?
No, the flow is closed, right? So, even when it's open, that's open. What it impact is to the inlet.
It's early in the process, but we've seen anywhere from like 20 to as high as 50% of restriction. But that doesn't mean that you're blocking 50% of the water. It just means you're blocking, because the water will accelerate through that opening. But there could be some reduction in exchange of water in the ocean bed.
So you said 50%, potentially 55%?
So the reduction in the cross-sectional area, if you build a barrier, could be as high as 50%. Could be a lot lower. There's a lot of factors that go into what the actual constriction is. How much of that cross-sectional area can be blocked with the barrier.
Up in New Bedford, the gate is not the only thing that restricts the water. There's actually bypasses to the gate that remain open all the time to assist in the flow of the bed. So it's not even if the gate is open, there's other areas that are open, bypassing the gate that allows more circulation at the time it's open.
Yeah. And you know, we have the general approach right now is to use gates across the entire inlet. It's just that even though you have gates across the whole inlet, you still need solid foundations and piers that do still block part of the water column. So, you know, that would be optimized layer study to figure out what the best, optimized design is to minimize that constriction.
Are we ready to start working on the gate next week?
Storm to come.
Study's over.
Does the transfer of this from the New York State anybody have any other questions before we close it out? And do we have any phone numbers that you might be able to give out in case somebody has a question?
There's an email address on all the forms that they can contact.
Okay, there's also